Yours truly, Bremen Thompson, here again, continuing my Sylvester Stallone week with the Rambo movies leading up to Rambo Last Blood this Friday, which I am truly excited for. I cannot wait to see this. So, now that I've recently reviewed First Blood and Rambo First Blood Part 2, I'm continuing the series with Rambo 3. Well, right before I get into the review, I just wanted to talk about my experience with this film. I was like around I was like 13 when I first watched Rambo 3. Because, I mean, I loved First Blood and I loved First Blood Part 2 as a kid. The third movie just passed me by, as well as Rambo 4. But when it comes to Rambo 3, at the time, it was kind of like my least enjoyable film in the franchise because at first I just thought it was boring. But, I mean, besides all the action, because, I mean, as a kid, I was mostly the guy that was more into the action than, you know, plot. But when I watched it again, I mean, there's barely a plot to speak of in this one, and the movie's all about action, and it certainly delivers, much like First Blood Part 2. But First Blood Part 2 was a bit silly and over the top, and Rambo 3 is kind of similar to First Blood Part 2, which, for some people, that can be an issue, and honestly, I think I enjoy First Blood Part 2 a bit more than Rambo 3, because I think the action in First Blood Part 2 is a bit more impressive, but though few exceptions, but I would say Rambo 3 has like one or two action sequences, well, only I would just say one action sequence that was better than First Blood Part 2. But much like First Blood Part 2, I just don't think it's as good as First Blood. Well, it doesn't matter, I mean, how many sequels they make. It's just they just can't compare with First Blood, with one exception. So far I would say the best of the sequels would have to be Rambo 4, or Rambo as it's, well, that's the title of Rambo 4, it's just Rambo, but in some countries it's titled John Rambo if you buy the Blu-ray. So, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't necessarily call Rambo 3 a bad movie. It has its moments. I mean, Stallone is great as always as Rambo, and this is sadly the third and final portrayal of Richard Crenna as Colonel Trotman, and he's without a doubt the second biggest character in this series, because he has a much bigger impact in this film than First Blood and First Blood Part 2. So now that I've given my thoughts, almost forgot to mention, this movie does have its problems, and for the Razzies, that when it came out, after that year, it was nominated for 5 and won just one. One for Worst Actor for Sylvester Stallone, which I kind of disagree with, because just like with First Blood Part 2, and the rest of the nominees was for Worst Picture, Worst Screenplay, Worst Director, and Worst Supporting Actor for Richard Crenna, and I really don't agree with that either, because Richard Crenna as Troutman gives a damn good performance in all 3 movies. Now that I got that out of the way, I'm gonna get into spoilers, so you've been warned. So the movie begins with Rambo and competing with a stick fight with some guy in Thailand. Well, Rambo is settling in Thailand after the events of First Blood Part 2. So, while this stick fight is very excellently choreographed and definitely one of the best scenes in the movie, so after all that, he's later greeted by Troutman, and they explained that Troutman was tasked to lead a mission that can help the Afghan rebels against the Soviet forces that are invading Afghanistan. But this is another issue that I have with this movie, because, I mean, watching it now in a post 9/11 era, I mean, it kind of feels awkward for an action hero such as Rambo to team up with Afghans. And I know this can be a big issue for a lot of people. I mean, because 9/11 for all of us was a terribly tragic day, and so many lives were lost, and God rest their souls. Yeah. Gone but never forgotten. So now that I've had that out of the way, since they asked Troutman to go in to lead the mission, Troutman wants Rambo to go with him, but at first Rambo refuses, so Troutman goes alone to lead his team, but once they get to the border, they are immediately ambushed by the Soviets. So Troutman eventually gets captured, and Rambo is eventually informed by this and decides to go and rescue Troutman and also help the Afghan rebels along the way. Well, all this is happening. I mean, at least a few decent, like, well, they're not as impactful as, like, say, like, First Blood or at least First Blood Part 2, except the ending, I would have to say. So, right when Rambo was about to free Troutman from his prison, he gets wounded. He has, like, I almost couldn't tell if it was either shrapnel or a piece of wood, but he has, like, a piece of shrapnel or wood that pierced right through his torso, right in the back of his abdomen, so he has to rip it out and then just use gunpowder to cauterize the wound. And as for the villain in the movie, he is technically a cartoon villain. I mean, because his lines, oh my god, they're almost laughable at best. I mean, every time he speaks an over-the-top line, I almost wanted to laugh. But because his lines, "You cannot escape. We will not attack if you do not run. Drop your weapons now." I'm like, this is a cartoon in a way. I am convinced that's what this was originally, a cartoon, because back in the 80s there was actually a Rambo cartoon. No, I am not making this up. I swear to you, this is true. I am not making this up. If you do know about the cartoon, you probably know what I'm talking about. So, anyways, Rambo does eventually free Troutman, and this leads to pretty decent action sequences in a cave, mostly relying on, like, Rambo just stealthily, like, taking out a few Soviet troops. And there's also this one fight where this one fight that he has with a big Russian guy, almost similar to the other big Russian in the helicopter in First Blood Part 2. That was kind of an action 80s movie tropes in, like, most movies. I mean, like, I mean, look at Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was the Nazi mechanic, or the big thuggy guy in the Temple of Doom, or the German general in The Last Crusade. Most 80s action movies had that kind of, like, formula of which the hero has to fight this big guy who's, like, the villain's main henchman. And also, I mean, in Die Hard, John McClane had to go up against Hans. Sorry, I was thinking of something else. I meant Carl. I meant to say Carl. My bad. So John McClane had to go up against Carl near the end of the film. So, yeah, just had to get that out of the way as well. After all that, this leads to the final battle at the end, where Rambo and Troutman are cornered by the Soviets, but then they are eventually saved by the rebels. And this one over-the-top scene where Rambo just kills the main villain by shooting him. Well, he's riding a tank, and the villain is in a helicopter. So he just rams the tank into the helicopter, and Rambo miraculously survives. It's almost like, mostly in First Blood actually First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3, it's almost like back in these two movies where Rambo is basically an indestructible soldier who can take on, like, millions of troops and just barely break a sweat. Because, I mean, at the time, I mean, some people were pretty much okay with Rambo being that kind of character, but I mostly prefer the more grounded, serious, and PTSD Rambo that was introduced in First Blood. And I know a lot of people will agree with me on this. So I mean, that's the kind of Rambo that I mostly love. I mean, for me, First Blood will always be the best in the Rambo series. So then after all that, the movie just ends, and that's it. But I will say that while Rambo 3 does have some decent action sequences, well, the best one being at the end, and I also mentioned the action sequences in the cave. I mean, like I said, this movie does have its moments, but it has like a weak script, and the two best things in this movie are Stallone and Richard Crenna, because they're great in their roles. And while at sometimes, I mean, it does, like I said, it does have its problems with the screenplay, and like I said, the villain is a cartoon villain, pretty much. So I'm gonna give Rambo 3 a C-. So I didn't really enjoy this as much as First Blood, or in this case also Rambo First Blood Part 2. But I will say that it was at least enjoyably bad. So I guess that's one way to put it. And this was also, sadly, the last film in the series to be composed by Jerry Goldsmith, rest in peace. While I do like some of his music in this film, but I mostly love his music for First Blood. Like I said in my First Blood review, I haven't really paid much attention to Jerry Goldsmith's work, but I'll definitely be sure to check out what other scores they've done over the years. Yeah, so I'm gonna try to review Rambo 4 in this case, all leading up to Rambo Last Blood, which we'll be seeing tomorrow, which I am completely excited for, and I cannot wait to talk to you about it. And so much going on. So yeah, what are your thoughts on Rambo 3? Let me know in the comment section below, and also check out Cody Leach. He's been reviewing the Rambo films right before I was doing this. Well, mostly this month I mostly wanted to review like a select few Sylvester Stallone movies leading up to Rambo Last Blood, or if I wasn't able to, I mean, later this month I was going to review the Rocky movies after I reviewed the Rambo movies. So yeah, I just wanted to get that off my chest. So what are your thoughts on Rambo 3? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you want news on the latest new or old movies, you know where to find me.